My name is Nadia Cole. I'm 58 years old, and in about 30 seconds, I'm going to walk into that boardroom and change everything. The elevator hums beneath my feet. Steel walls, soft lighting, and the faint smell of expensive cologne someone left behind. Through the frosted glass doors ahead, I can make out shadows, board members, lawyers, people whose names carry weight in rooms like this. They're waiting for me. My reflection stares back at me from the polished steel, simple blouse, no jewelry except my wedding band, hair pulled back. I look exactly like what Warren Sterling has always believed me to be, unremarkable, out of place, someone who got lucky when his son Graham fell in love with me. Warren is 81 now. Still sharp, still ruthless, still convinced that money and lineage are the only currencies that matter. For 35 years, he's made it clear that I don't belong in his world. Not refined, he'd say at family dinners, smiling like it was a compliment. Too aggressive when I spoke up during conversations about the business. She got lucky when anyone asked how Graham and I met. He thought I was silent because I had nothing to say. He was wrong. The elevator dings. The doors begin to slide open, and I can hear Warren's voice now. Smooth, commanding, probably mid-sentence about succession planning or quarterly projections for Sterling Developments Group. SDG. The family empire. Commercial real estate across Ontario, office towers, mixed-use plazas, luxury retail spaces. Built on his father's money, grown with my capital. He just doesn't know that part yet. I think about the last time I stood in this building. 3 months ago, for a gala celebrating SDG's 50th anniversary. Warren gave a speech about legacy, about building something that would outlast him. He thanked his late father, his business partners, his dedicated team. He didn't mention Graham. He didn't mention me. We were furniture in the back of the room. That night, on the drive home to North York, Graham was quiet. Not angry. Graham doesn't do angry the way his father does. Just defeated. Maybe he's right, he said softly. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. I reached across the console and took his hand. He's not right, I told him. He's just loud. But something shifted in me that night. I realized that silence, my silence, wasn't protecting us anymore. It was enabling him. I take one breath. Steady. Calm. I was invisible on purpose. For decades, I let Warren believe I was nothing. I let him seat us at the far end of tables. I let him make comments about our modest home in North York like it was a failure instead of a choice. I let him dismiss our daughter Jules as wasted potential because she chose social work over boardrooms. I let him do all of that because I didn't need his respect. I had something better. I had truth. And I had leverage. If you love stories where someone gets underestimated, and then the entire room has to swallow its pride, subscribe to Revenge Bite. Because what happened next? It didn't just shock them. It rewrote the rules. The elevator doors open fully now. I can see the boardroom table through the glass, 10 chairs, 8 of them filled. Warren sits at the head, his back to me, gesturing at something on a tablet. Blake, his golden child, sits 2 seats down, nodding like a bobblehead. Graham is there too, looking uncomfortable in a suit he probably hasn't worn in months. They don't know I'm here yet. The meeting wasn't supposed to start for another 5 minutes, but I arrived early. I wanted to hear what they say when they think I'm not listening. And once the transition is complete, Warren is saying, we'll need to address the optics. Blake will take point on investor relations, and Graham can assist where appropriate. Assist where appropriate. Like Graham hasn't spent 30 years trying to prove himself to a man who made up his mind before Graham even graduated. I step forward. My heels click softly against the marble floor. Warren stops mid-sentence and turns. For just a moment, half a second, I see something flicker across his face. Surprise. Maybe annoyance. Then it's gone, replaced by that polite, controlled mask he's perfected over decades. Nadia, he says, like my name is a question. I didn't realize you'd be joining us. I wasn't planning to, I say. My voice is calm. Steady. But then I remembered. I own 47% of this company. So I figured I should probably show up. The room goes silent. Warren's smile freezes. Blake's mouth opens slightly. Graham stares at me like I've just spoken a foreign language. But before I explain how we got here, before I show them the documents, the filings, the decades of quiet strategy, you need to understand what Warren did at the gala. What he said to my husband. What he offered me, like I was a prop he could position however he liked. You need to understand why, after 35 years of silence, I decided that enough was finally enough. If you love stories where someone gets underestimated, and then the entire room has to swallow its pride, subscribe to Revenge Bite. Because what happened next? It didn't just shock them. It rewrote the rules. I met Graham Sterling in the spring of 1991. I was 23, working in operations for a small logistics firm, living in a basement apartment near Yonge and Eglinton. He was 25, fresh out of business school, trying to prove to his father that he could make decisions on his own. We met at a community fundraiser, nothing fancy, just folding chairs and donated coffee in a church basement somewhere in Scarborough. Graham was there because his mother Elaine had volunteered him. I was there because I actually believed in the cause. He didn't lead with his last name. He didn't mention his father's company or the house in Rosedale or any of the things that were supposed to make him impressive. He just asked me about my work. Not where I went to school, not who my family was. Just what I did, what I cared about. When I told him I was building a quiet investment portfolio on the side, small positions, long-term plays, nothing flashy, his eyes lit up. Not because he wanted something from me. Because he was interested. Actually interested. We talked for 2 hours. He walked me to my car. 3 days later, he called and asked if I wanted to get coffee. 6 months later, we were married. Warren didn't attend the wedding. He sent a card. It was polite, formal, and devastatingly clear. We wish you both well in your endeavors. Translation: you've disappointed me, and she's the reason why. The message was obvious. Graham had married down, and Warren wanted nothing to do with it. Graham chose me anyway. We bought a small bungalow in North York. 1,600 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a backyard just big enough for a garden and a small patio where we drink coffee on Sunday mornings. We could have afforded more, I could have afforded more, but we didn't need a mansion to prove anything. We needed a home, not a statement. 3 years later, we had Jules. Jules Cole Sterling. She got my stubbornness and Graham's empathy, which meant she was never going to fit Warren's mold. By the time she was 10, she was volunteering at shelters. By 20, she'd chosen social work over business school. Warren called it wasted potential. I called it integrity. She's 36 now, running a tenant support program in Regent Park, living in a small apartment with a roommate, driving a Honda Civic that's older than some of her clients. Warren still doesn't understand her. But that's because he's never understood what it means to choose people over profit. For 35 years, I watched Warren wield his wealth like a weapon. Not with shouting or threats, that would be beneath him. With seating arrangements at dinners where Graham and I were placed at the far end of the table, away from the important guests. With polite questions about whether we'd ever upgrade from North York, as if our home was something to be embarrassed about. With comments about how Jules could have done so much more if she just followed the Sterling playbook. And I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak. Not because I was afraid. Because I was building something he would never see coming. My grandfather left me mineral rights and a modest trust when he died in 1989. I was 21, still figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. Most people would have spent it or let it sit in a savings account collecting dust. I invested it. Carefully. Quietly. In companies that weren't flashy but were positioned for long-term growth. By 1996, I was worth $8 million. By 2003, I was worth $80 million. And I did it all while working an ordinary job, operations, accounting, admin roles where I kept my head down and my name off anything that would attract attention. I was invisible on purpose. My money was held in trusts and holding companies. My name rarely showed up in places people like Warren would ever look. 3 weeks ago, everything changed. Graham's phone rang late on a Tuesday evening. It was Elaine, Warren's wife. Her voice had that tight, formal quality it always got when Warren was orchestrating something. "Your father wants everyone at the house," she said. "Saturday evening. A donor event for the Sterling Foundation. He says it's important." Graham looked at me across the kitchen table, and I knew. This wasn't a charity night. This was a throne room, and Warren was about to announce his heir. People always ask the same question when they find out someone has money they never talked about: why didn't you just tell them? The answer is simple. Because the moment you tell people you have money, everything changes. Every conversation becomes transactional. Every relationship gets filtered through the question: do they want me, or do they want what I have? I didn't want that. Not with Graham. Not with Jules. And I definitely didn't want to give Warren Sterling the satisfaction of thinking his money, or his world, was something I needed access to. So I stayed quiet. I built my life in the margins, where people like Warren don't bother to look. After my grandfather died in 1989, I spent months reading. Not novels or magazines, investment reports, market analyses, histories of companies that survived recessions and companies that didn't. I wanted to understand how wealth actually worked, not the flashy kind that shows up in penthouses and luxury cars, but the kind that compounds quietly over decades. I started small. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. REITs that paid steady dividends. Bonds that weren't sexy but were stable. I worked my regular job, operations and logistics, the kind of behind-the-scenes roles where you keep systems running but never get credit, and I lived below my means. Way below. By 1996, my portfolio had grown to $8 million. By 2003, it was $80 million. And by 2015, I had crossed into 9 figures. Today, if you wanted an exact number, I'm worth somewhere around $340 million. Not billionaire territory, but more than enough to do what I needed to do. And what I needed to do was buy control of Warren Sterling's company without him ever knowing. Starting in 1997, I began acquiring shares in Sterling Developments Group. Not under my name, under a holding company called Coleridge Capital, registered through a law firm in Toronto that specialized in exactly this kind of structure. The shares were held in trust, the filings were public but buried under layers of corporate entities, and my name never appeared anywhere that Warren or his lawyers would think to check. I bought 5% in 1997. Another 8% in 1999. Another 12% in 2001. By 2003, I owned 47% of SDG, the largest single shareholder. Larger than Warren. Larger than the pension funds and institutional investors. Larger than anyone. And I did it while sitting at the far end of his dinner table, listening to him talk about his company like he'd built it all himself. Why did I do it? Honestly, at first it was just good business. SDG was undervalued. The real estate market in Ontario was about to boom, and Warren's developments were positioned perfectly. It made financial sense. But over the years, it became something else. It became insurance. A safety net. A way to make sure that if Warren ever decided to really come after Graham, to cut him out, to punish him for choosing me, I'd have the power to stop it. I never wanted to use it. I told myself that as long as Warren's cruelty stayed aimed at me, I could take it. Words don't break bones. Seating arrangements don't ruin lives. I could endure his contempt if it meant keeping the peace. But then he made it about my family. If you've ever been called too aggressive just for speaking clearly, or not refined because you refuse to perform, subscribe to Revenge Bite. We're breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent, and you're going to want to see what I did with that 47%. The Saturday before the gala, Graham and I were having coffee in the backyard. It was one of those October mornings where the air is cold but the sun is warm, and you can smell wood smoke from someone's fireplace down the street. "Do we have to go?" Graham asked. He was staring into his mug like the answer might be floating in there. You know what happens if we don't, I said. He nodded. We both knew. If we skipped the gala, Warren would interpret it as weakness. As proof that we couldn't handle being in his world. He'd use it against Graham forever. I just don't understand why he needs to make everything a performance, Graham said quietly. Why can't he just, I don't know, be a father? I reached across the table and took his hand. Because being a father would require him to see you as a person. And Warren Sterling doesn't see people. He sees rankings. Graham looked up at me. Do you ever regret it? Marrying into this? Never, I said. And I meant it. I didn't marry into this. I married you. There's a difference. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the gala, about what Warren was planning. Succession. Legacy. Announcements. I knew what was coming. Blake would be crowned, Graham would be sidelined, and I'd be expected to smile and clap like it was all perfectly fair. And for the first time in 35 years, I realized I wasn't willing to do that anymore. I got out of bed and went to my office, the second bedroom we'd converted years ago, the one with the filing cabinet and the desk where I managed investments and paperwork. I opened my laptop and pulled up the shareholder registry for SDG. There it was. Coalbridge Capital. 47%. Voting rights, active. I'd built this leverage decades ago, and I'd promised myself I'd only use it if I absolutely had to. I stared at the screen for a long time, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Then I opened a new email and typed a message to my lawyer. Prepare a beneficial ownership disclosure for Sterling Developments Group. I want it ready to file within 24 hours. I hit send before I could change my mind. The house in Rosedale looked like something out of a magazine. Stone facade, circular driveway, perfectly manicured hedges that probably cost more to maintain than most people's mortgages. Cars line the street, BMWs, Teslas, a Bentley that belonged to one of Warren's oldest business partners. Graham parked our Corolla at the far end of the driveway, tucked between a Mercedes and a Range Rover. He turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. You ready? I asked. No, he said. But let's go anyway. We walked up the front steps together. The door was already open. Elaine was greeting guests in the foyer, wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage. She smiled when she saw us, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Graham. Nadia. So glad you could make it. She kissed Graham on the cheek, then turned to me. You look comfortable. It was a compliment designed to feel like an insult. I was wearing a simple black dress, no jewelry except my wedding band and a pair of small earrings Jules had given me for my birthday. Compared to the other women in the room, dripping in diamonds, designer handbags casually slung over their shoulders, I looked plain. That was the point. Thank you, Elaine, I said. You look lovely. She gestured toward the main hall. Everyone's gathering in the great room. Your father wants to make an announcement before dinner. Graham's jaw tightened, but he nodded. We made our way through the house, past walls covered in expensive art and hallways lined with photographs of Warren shaking hands with politicians and business leaders. There were no family photos. No pictures of Graham as a kid, or Jules at her graduation. Just Warren, over and over, positioning himself at the center of every frame. The great room was packed. 50, maybe 60 people, all holding champagne flutes and making the kind of small talk that rich people mistake for conversation. I recognized a few faces, board members from SDG, a couple of city councilors, investors who'd been in Warren's orbit for decades. And then there was Blake. Blake Sterling. Warren's golden child. 54 years old, VP of Development at SDG, living proof that nepotism doesn't require competence. He was standing near the fireplace, laughing too loudly at something one of the counselors had said, his hand resting on the man's shoulder like they were old friends. Blake saw us and waved. Graham raised his hand in a half-hearted response. Think he knows? I asked quietly. About what? Graham said. About any of this. The announcement. The plan. Graham shook his head. Blake always knows. Dad tells him everything. We found a spot near the back of the room, close to the windows that overlooked the garden. Jules arrived a few minutes later, slightly out of breath, still wearing her work clothes, dark jeans, a sweater, practical boots. "Sorry I'm late," she said, hugging me. "Client emergency. Someone's landlord tried to lock them out without notice." "Did you fix it?" I asked. "For now." She looked around the room and grimaced. "God, I forgot how much I hate these things." "You and me both," Graham muttered. A server passed by with a tray of champagne. Jules grabbed a glass. I didn't. I wanted to stay sharp. At exactly 7:30, Warren stepped into the center of the room. Conversations died instantly. He didn't have to raise his voice or tap a glass. His presence alone was enough to command attention. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone who'd spent decades speaking to rooms full of people who hung on his every word. The Sterling Foundation has always been about legacy. About building something that lasts. And tonight, I want to talk about the future. He paused for effect. The room was silent except for the faint clink of glasses. As many of you know, I'm 81 years old. I've spent the last 50 years building Sterling Developments Group into one of the most successful real estate firms in Ontario. But I'm not going to live forever. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Which is why I'm pleased to announce that Blake Sterling will be taking over as CEO, effective January 1st. The room erupted in applause. Blake stepped forward, grinning, shaking hands, accepting congratulations like he'd earned it. Graham's face was stone. Jules reached over and squeezed his arm. Warren wasn't finished. "Of course, this transition affects the whole family," he continued. "Graham will continue in his current advisory capacity." Advisory capacity. Not leadership. Not partnership. Advisory. And I've also made arrangements to ensure that everyone has a role to play in the foundation's future. His eyes landed on me. "Nadia," he said, and the room turned to look. "We'd love for you to take on a more visible role. Hosting donor events, representing the foundation at community functions. You have a certain warmth that I think would resonate well with our partners." He smiled. The room smiled. I didn't. Because what Warren had just said, in front of 60 people, was this: your decoration. Smile, wave, and stay out of the way. I looked at Graham. His face had gone pale. I looked at Jules. Her hands were clenched into fists. And I looked back at Warren, standing there in the center of his empire, surrounded by people who would never question him. Then I smiled. "That's very thoughtful, Warren," I said. "But I'm going to have to decline." The silence that followed was deafening. Warren's smile faltered, just for a second, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. But I was looking. I'd been watching Warren Sterling's micro-expressions for 35 years, learning to read the tiny cracks in his armor. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice still smooth but with an edge underneath. "I don't think I heard you correctly." "I said I'm going to have to decline," I repeated. My voice was calm, steady. I wasn't angry. I wasn't emotional. I was simply done. The hosting role. The community functions. All of it. Thank you for thinking of me, but no. The room had gone completely still. 60 people holding champagne flutes, frozen mid-sip, watching the most boring person in the room suddenly become the most interesting. Warren's jaw tightened. "Nadia, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," I said. "You made your announcement. I'm making mine. I'm not interested in being your PR wife." I heard someone gasp. Maybe it was Elaine. Maybe it was one of the board member spouses. I didn't turn to look. Blake stepped forward, his face flushed. Dad's offering you an opportunity here, Nadia. A chance to actually contribute something meaningful to the foundation. Maybe you should think about. Blake, I said, cutting him off, the last project you managed came in 6 months late and $3 million over budget. I'm not taking advice from you. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. Graham squeezed my hand under the table, not a warning, just solidarity. Warren's expression had shifted now. The polite mask was cracking. Nadia, I think you're forgetting where you are. This is my home. My family. My company. And you will show some respect. Respect, I repeated. I set down my water glass and stood up. Jules and Graham stood with me. Warren, I've shown you nothing but respect for 35 years. I've sat at the end of your tables. I've listened to you insult my home, my choices, my daughter. I've watched you treat my husband like a disappointment because he chose love over your approval. Warren's face was turning red now. You have no idea what you're talking about. I have every idea, I said. You think I'm here because I got lucky. You think I married Graham for security. You've spent 3 decades making it clear that I'm not refined enough, not polished enough, not good enough for your family. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. You want to know the truth, Warren? I didn't need your family. I didn't need your money. I didn't need anything from you except one thing, for you to treat the men I love with basic human decency. And you couldn't even do that. Warren took a step toward me. His voice was low, dangerous. You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing Graham. I suggest you leave before you make this worse. Make it worse. I laughed, not a bitter laugh, just genuine disbelief. Warren, I'm about to make it so much worse. Blake moved to his father's side. Dad, maybe we should. No, Warren snapped. She needs to hear this. He turned back to me, and now the mask was completely gone. This was Warren unfiltered, the version of himself he usually saved for closed-door meetings and private phone calls. You want to know what I really think, Nadia? Fine. I think you're aggressive. I think you're classless. I think my son made the biggest mistake of his life when he married you, and I think you've spent 35 years dragging him down to your level. Graham stepped forward. Dad, that's enough. It's not enough, Warren said. She needs to understand her place. You both do. Graham, you could have had everything. You could have taken over this company, built a legacy, made something of yourself. But you chose her. You chose that tiny house in North York, that modest little life, and now look at you, middle management in your own family's company. Graham's face had gone pale, but his voice was steady. I chose love, Dad. I chose a partner who actually sees me. I don't regret a single day of it. Warren shook his head. Then you're a fool. That's when Jules spoke up. She'd been quiet this whole time, standing beside me with her arms crossed, but now she stepped forward. Grandpa, she said, do you even hear yourself? You just announced that Uncle Blake, who's never successfully completed a project on time in his entire career, is going to run your company. You reduced my dad to an advisory capacity like he's some kind of employee you're humoring. And you offered my mom a role that's basically, smile and shut up. Jules, this doesn't concern you, Warren started. It absolutely concerns me, she said. Because I grew up watching you treat my parents like they were less than. Like their choices were failures. Like the life they built, the life I grew up in, was something to be ashamed of. And you know what? I'm proud of them. They chose substance over status. They chose each other. And they raised me to value people, not portfolios. Warren's expression hardened. And look where that got you. A social worker in Regent Park. Wasted potential. Jules smiled. It was the same smile I'd given him earlier, the one that said, you have no idea what's coming. You think I'm wasted potential? I've helped 200 families stay housed this year. I've fought landlords, stood up to developers, made sure people had heat and water and basic dignity. What have you done, Grandpa? Built office towers no one can afford. Warren pointed toward the door. Get out. All of you. Now. Gladly, I said. We turned to leave. Graham took my hand, Jules took his, and we walked toward the foyer together. Behind us, I could hear the murmur of shocked conversations starting to rise. 60 people who'd just witnessed Warren Sterling lose control of his own narrative. But as we reached the front door, I stopped. Turned back. Warren was standing in the center of the great room, still surrounded by his guests, his board members, his empire. He looked powerful. Untouchable. I pulled out my phone. Actually, Warren, I said, there's one more thing you should know. He stared at me. What? You asked me to show respect, I said. To understand my place. So let me clarify something for you. I opened my email app and pulled up the draft I'd prepared with my lawyer 3 days ago. The beneficial ownership disclosure. The document that would blow apart 35 years of assumptions. When was the last time you actually checked who holds voting control in Sterling Developments Group? I asked. Warren's expression shifted, confusion, then suspicion. What are you talking about? I'm talking about your shareholders, I said. Specifically, the largest one. Coalbridge Capital. Do you know who owns that? Blake frowned. That's an institutional investor. They've been with us for years. They have, I agreed. Since 1997, actually. Quietly buying shares. Building position. Never making a fuss. Never asking for board seats or special treatment. Just accumulating. Warren's face had gone very still. What are you saying? I hit send on the email. It went to Warren's corporate address, to the SDG board secretary, and to every board member whose contact information was publicly available. I'm saying that Coalbridge Capital owns 47% of your company, Warren. Voting shares. Which makes it the largest single shareholder. Larger than you. Larger than anyone. The room was dead silent. And I'm saying that I am Coalbridge Capital. If you've ever wanted to see a powerful man realize he's been underestimating someone for decades, I highly recommend it. The expression on Warren Sterling's face was worth every year of silence. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. That's impossible. It's not, I said. I held up my phone so he could see the email I'd just sent. Subject line, Beneficial Ownership Disclosure, Coalbridge Capital Incorporated. The filings are public record. They've been there for years. You just never bothered to look. Blake grabbed his own phone, already pulling up the shareholder registry. His face went white. Dad, she's not lying. Coalbridge Capital. 47%. Acquired between 1997 and 2003. Registered under. He looked up at me. How is this possible? You don't have this kind of money. I do, I said simply. I've had it for a long time. I just didn't feel the need to announce it. Warren's hands were shaking. Not with fear, with rage. This is fraud. You falsified documents. I didn't, I said. Every share was purchased legally. Every filing was submitted on time. Every dollar was accounted for. If you want to challenge it, Warren, go ahead. Take me to court. Hire the best lawyers you can find. They'll tell you the same thing. I own 47% of Sterling Developments Group, and there's nothing you can do about it. One of the board members, an older man named Gerald who'd been with SDG since the 80s, stepped forward. Warren, is this true? Warren didn't answer. He was staring at me like I'd just pulled a gun. Gerald turned to Blake. Is the registration legitimate? Blake scrolled through his phone, his face growing paler with every second. It appears to be. The incorporation documents check out. The share transfers are registered with the province. The voting rights are active. Active, Gerald repeated. He looked at me. Miss Cole, are you telling us that you've held majority voting control of this company for over 20 years? I am, I said. Another board member, a woman named Patricia who ran a pension fund, spoke up. And you never exercised those rights. Never attended a board meeting, never voted on a resolution. I didn't need to, I said. The company was performing well. Management was competent, mostly. I saw no reason to interfere. Until now, Gerald said. Until now, I agreed. Warren found his voice. It was low, shaking with fury. You manipulative, scheming. Careful, I said. We're in a room full of witnesses. He took a step toward me. Graham moved between us. Dad, Graham said quietly, I think you should sit down. Get out of my way, Warren snapped. No. Graham's voice was steady. You've been calling the shots in this family for my entire life. You've decided who mattered and who didn't. Who had value and who was just furniture. But it turns out you were wrong about something pretty fundamental. Warren stared at his son. What? Nadia isn't the weak link, Graham said. She's the strongest person in this room. She's been holding the power the entire time. And you were too arrogant to see it. Warren's face was purple now. He turned to Patricia, to Gerald, to the other board members scattered throughout the room. This is a hostile takeover. She's trying to steal my company. It's not your company, I said. It's our company. And I'm not trying to steal it. I'm trying to fix it. Blake laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Fix it. You don't know the first thing about running a real estate development firm. I know more than you think, I said. I know that the Oakville project is hemorrhaging money because you approved contractor bids without proper due diligence. I know that the Mississauga Tower has code violations that haven't been addressed because you were too busy schmoozing investors to do your job. I know that 3 women filed complaints against senior management last year, and instead of investigating, you paid them to go away. Blake's face went slack. How do you? I'm the largest shareholder, I said. I get copies of everything. Financial reports. Legal settlements. Internal audits. I've been reading them for years. I just never felt the need to act on them. Warren's voice was hoarse. What do you want? I want an emergency board meeting, I said. Tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. I'm calling for a vote on the current leadership structure. You can't do that, Blake said. I can, I said. As the largest shareholder, I have the right to request an emergency meeting to address governance concerns. It's in the bylaws. Page 14, Section 3.2. Patricia pulled out her phone. She's right. I'm looking at the bylaws now. Gerald nodded slowly. If Ms. Cole requests an emergency meeting, we're obligated to convene one within 48 hours. Fine, Warren said. His voice was ice. We'll have your meeting. And when it's over, you'll be removed from the shareholder registry for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and... There's no fraud, I said. There's no breach. There's just you, realizing that the woman you spent 35 years underestimating has been in control the whole time. Warren stepped closer. We were standing face to face now, close enough that I could see the veins in his neck, the fury in his eyes. You will regret this, he said quietly. No, I said. I really won't. I turned to Graham and Jules. Let's go. We walked out of that house, past the champagne flutes and designer handbags, past the expensive art and perfectly manicured hedges, and got into our Corolla. Graham started the engine. His hands were shaking. Jules leaned forward from the back seat. Mom, did that just happen? It did, I said. Holy shit, Jules whispered. Graham pulled out of the driveway. We drove in silence for a few minutes, through the quiet streets of Rosedale, past the mansions and gated estates, until we hit Young Street and the city opened up around us. Then Graham started laughing. Not nervous laughter, real, deep, relieved laughter. 47%, he said. 47%. You've owned almost half his company since 2003. I have, I said. And you never told me. I didn't think it mattered, I said. We had everything we needed. He reached over and took my hand. You're terrifying. You know that, right? I smiled. I've been told. Jules was grinning. Grandpa's face. Did you see his face? I've never seen him that speechless. It was pretty satisfying, I admitted. So what happens now? Graham asked. The board meeting tomorrow, what are you actually going to do? I looked out the window at the city lights, at the neighborhoods we'd called home for 35 years, at the life we'd built together without needing Warren's approval or his money. I'm going to do what I should have done years ago, I said. I'm going to protect the people I love. And I'm going to make sure Warren Sterling understands that power doesn't come from being loud. It comes from being patient. I didn't sleep that night. Graham was out cold by midnight, exhaustion finally catching up with him after the adrenaline wore off. But I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of our bedroom in North York, listening to the furnace kick on and the sound of a car passing on the street outside. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Jules. Mom. Are you awake? Yes, I typed back. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Are you scared? I thought about that for a moment. Was I scared? Warren had spent 35 years building an empire, surrounding himself with people who owed him favors, who depended on his goodwill. He had lawyers, connections, decades of accumulated power. But I had something better. I had truth. And I had 47%. No, I typed. I'm ready. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at SDG's downtown offices, a glass tower on King Street that Warren had built in the early 2000s. I'd walked past it 1,000 times over the years, never once thinking that I owned nearly half of it. Graham and I arrived at 9:45. The lobby was marble and steel, the kind of space designed to make you feel small. A security guard checked our IDs and directed us to the 22nd floor. When the elevator doors opened, I saw them, Warren, Blake, and 3 lawyers in expensive suits, huddled near the boardroom entrance. They stopped talking when they saw me. Warren's face was unreadable. Blake looked like he hadn't slept either. Nadia, Warren said. His voice was calm now, too calm. The rage from last night had been replaced with something colder, more calculated. I think we should talk before the meeting starts. There's nothing to talk about, I said. I disagree. He gestured toward a smaller conference room down the hall. 5 minutes. Just you and me. Graham stepped closer to me. Anything you say to her, you can say in front of me. Warren's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine. Both of you. We followed him into the conference room. Blake and the lawyer stayed outside. Warren closed the door. For a long moment, no one spoke. Warren stood by the window, looking out at the city. When he finally turned around, his expression was different, not angry, not contemptuous. Just tired. You could have told me, he said quietly. Would it have changed anything? I asked. He didn't answer. You made up your mind about me 35 years ago, I continued. You decided I wasn't good enough, that I was dragging Graham down, that I was here for the wrong reasons. If I'd told you I had money, if I'd told you I was building wealth, investing, positioning myself, you would have found another reason to dismiss me. Maybe I was too ambitious. Maybe I was threatening. Maybe I was just a woman who didn't know her place. Warren's face hardened. That's not fair. Isn't it? I said. You spent decades treating me like furniture. You seated me at the far end of tables. You made snide comments about our house, our choices, our daughter. You offered me a hosting role last night, Warren. Like I was some kind of decorative accessory you could position however you liked. I was trying to include you. You were trying to control me, I said. There's a difference. Graham spoke up. Dad, she's right. You've been doing this my entire life. You don't include people, you rank them. You decide who's valuable and who's not. And anyone who doesn't fit your definition of success gets pushed aside. Warren turned to his son. I gave you every opportunity. You gave me opportunities that came with conditions, Graham said. Do it my way. Think my way. Value what I value. And when I chose something different, when I chose Nadia, when I chose a life that wasn't about status and performance, you made it clear I'd failed you. Warren's hands clenched into fists. I wanted you to have a legacy. I have a legacy, Graham said. I have a marriage that's lasted 35 years. I have a daughter who makes the world better. I have a life I'm proud of. That's my legacy. Warren looked at me. What do you want, Nadia? Money. A seat on the board. Control of the company. I want you to step down, I said. The room went silent. You're 81 years old, I continued. You've built something remarkable. But you're also running it into the ground because you can't let go. Blake isn't qualified to lead, you know that. The board knows that. But you were going to hand him the company anyway because he's loyal, because he doesn't question you, because he'll do whatever you tell him. He's my son. And that's exactly the problem, I said. This isn't a kingdom, Warren. It's a company. It has employees, investors, stakeholders. It has responsibilities that go beyond your ego. Warren's voice was ice. So you're going to take it from me? No, I said. I'm going to save it. There's a difference. At 10 a.m., we walked into the boardroom. 8 people were already seated, Gerald, Patricia, and 6 other board members I recognized from filings and annual reports. They all stood when we entered, not out of respect for Warren, but because they didn't know what else to do. Warren took his seat at the head of the table. Blake sat to his right. Graham and I sat at the opposite end. Gerald cleared his throat. This is an emergency meeting called by Coalbridge Capital, represented by Ms. Nadia Cole, who holds 47% voting control of Sterling Developments Group. Ms. Cole has requested a review of current leadership structure. The floor is yours, Ms. Cole. I stood. My hands were steady. Thank you, Gerald. I'll be brief. I'm calling for a vote to remove Warren Sterling as CEO and chairman of the board, effective immediately, and to place Blake Sterling on administrative leave pending a comprehensive review of his performance as VP of Development. Blake shot to his feet. You can't do that. I can, I said. And I have documentation to support the motion. I slid a folder across the table to Gerald. Page 3 outlines the Oakville project overruns. Page 7 covers the compliance issues in Mississauga. Page 12 details the settlements paid to former employees who filed complaints against senior management, complaints that were never properly investigated. Patricia opened the folder. Her expression darkened as she read. This is slander, Blake said. She's making this up. I'm not, I said. Every document in that folder came from SDG's own internal reports. Reports that were filed with the board but never acted upon. Gerald looked up at Warren. Warren, did you know about these issues? Warren didn't answer. Did you? Gerald pressed. They were being handled, Warren said finally. By paying people to go away? Patricia said. Her voice was sharp. Warren, these are serious governance failures. If Ms. Cole hadn't brought this to our attention. She's manipulating you, Warren said. She's been hiding her identity for decades, buying up shares in secret, positioning herself to take over. She's been protecting her investment, Gerald said. And frankly, based on what I'm seeing here, I think she had good reason to be concerned. I sat back down. I'm not asking for control. I'm asking for accountability. Warren built this company, and I respect that. But it's time for professional leadership. Someone without family ties, without conflicts of interest. Someone who can make decisions based on what's best for the company, not what's best for the Sterling name. Warren stood. You want to vote me out? Fine. Let's vote. But don't pretend this is about governance. This is revenge. It's not, I said quietly. It's protection. Gerald called for the vote. All in favor of removing Warren Sterling as CEO and chairman, effective immediately. I raised my hand. Patricia raised hers. 2 other board members followed. All opposed. Blake raised his hand. 2 others did the same. Warren didn't vote, he couldn't, as the subject of the motion. Gerald looked at the remaining board member, a man named David who ran a construction firm. David looked at Warren. Then at me. Then at the folder in front of Patricia. He raised his hand. In favor. The motion passed. 5-3. Warren stood slowly. For a moment, I thought he might argue, might fight, might refuse to accept it. But then he just looked at me. Really looked at me. And I saw something I'd never seen before in Warren Sterling's eyes: defeat. You win, he said quietly. This wasn't about winning, I said. Yes, it was. He turned to Graham. I hope you're happy. I am, Graham said. For the first time in a long time. Warren walked out of the boardroom. Blake followed. The door closed behind them. Gerald exhaled. Well, that was overdue, Patricia said. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through our bedroom window and the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. Graham was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. You're reading the news, aren't you? I said. He looked up and smiled. There's a press release. Warren announced his retirement. After 50 years of dedicated service, I've decided to step down and spend more time with family. That's generous of him, I said. Blake's been placed on administrative leave. They're bringing in an external firm to review operations. Graham closed his laptop. Nadia, what you did yesterday? We did, I corrected. What we did, he said, was extraordinary. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me, I said. I was protecting us. Protecting Jules. Protecting the life we built. He stood and wrapped his arms around me. We stood there in our small kitchen, in our modest house in North York, holding each other while the coffee finished brewing. Later that afternoon, Jules came over. She brought takeout from the Thai place down the street, the one we'd been going to for 20 years, where the owner knew our order by heart. So, Jules said, settling into the couch, my mom is secretly a business mogul. That's my origin story now. You're handling this well, I said. I'm handling it because it makes sense, she said. You've always been the smartest person in every room. I just didn't realize you were also the richest. I'm not. Mom. You own 47% of a commercial real estate empire. You're rich. I sighed. Fine. I'm comfortable. Jules grinned. Then her expression turned serious. What happens now? With the company? The board is interviewing candidates for CEO, I said. Someone with actual experience, no family connections. Once they're in place, I'll step back. I don't want to run the company, I just wanted to make sure it was run properly. And Grandpa? He'll be fine, I said. He has money, status, a legacy. He just doesn't have control anymore. And that's what he's really angry about. Graham came in from the kitchen with 3 mugs of tea. I talked to my mom today. She called to apologize. I raised my eyebrows. Elaine apologized. Sort of, he said. She said she understands why I felt the need to take action. Which I think is Elaine speak for you were right and my husband was wrong. Jules laughed. That's the closest you're going to get. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking, eating pad thai, watching the light fade through the living room windows. At one point, Jules asked me the question I'd been expecting. Did you always know you were going to do this? When you started buying shares back in the 90s, did you know it would come to this? I thought about that. No. Honestly, I hoped I'd never have to use it. I just needed to know that if Warren ever tried to really hurt Graham, or you, I'd have a way to stop him. And now you have, Jules said. Now I have, I agreed. A week later, I got a phone call from Warren. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Nadia, he said. His voice sounded older on the phone. Smaller. Warren. I need to ask you something, he said. Why did you wait so long? If you had this kind of power for 2 decades, why didn't you use it sooner? I looked out the window at our backyard, the garden Graham and I had planted together, the fence we'd repaired ourselves, the small patio where we'd had coffee every Sunday morning for 35 years. Because it was never about revenge, I said. It was about protection. As long as you were just insulting me, I could live with it. But the moment you started tearing down the people I love, the moment you made Graham feel worthless, the moment you dismissed Jules as a failure, that's when silence stopped being an option. Warren was quiet for a long time. Then, for what it's worth, I was wrong about you. Yes, I said. You were. He hung up. Graham came up behind me and rested his chin on my shoulder. Was that him? It was. What did he want? To understand, I said. To know why I waited. And what did you tell him? I turned and looked at my husband, the man who'd chosen me over his father's approval, who'd built a quiet, beautiful life with me, who'd never once asked me to be anyone other than who I was. I told him the truth, I said. That I was invisible on purpose. That I didn't need his respect or his recognition. I just needed him to leave my family alone. And when he couldn't do that, I made sure he didn't have a choice anymore. Graham smiled. You're terrifying. I've been told. If this story gave you that quiet kind of strength, the kind that doesn't scream, it just changes outcomes, subscribe to Revenge Bite. And let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Because there are more people out there like me, and they deserve to be heard. 3 months later, SDG hired a new CEO, a woman named Michelle Torres who'd successfully turned around 2 other development firms. Blake left the company entirely and moved to Vancouver. Warren kept his emeritus title but no voting power, no authority. Graham started consulting for a nonprofit that helped small businesses access commercial real estate. Jules expanded her tenant support program with a quiet donation from an anonymous donor, me, through a trust. And every Sunday morning, Graham and I still sit on our patio in North York with our coffee, watching the neighbors walk their dogs, listening to the city wake up. Warren spent his life chasing status, building monuments to his own ego. He thought power came from being the loudest voice in the room, the name on the building, the man everyone feared. But real power, the kind that lasts, doesn't announce itself. It waits. It watches. It builds quietly in the margins, where people like Warren don't bother to look. I was invisible on purpose. Until the moment I needed to be seen. And when that moment came, I made sure the entire room understood, I wasn't lucky. I wasn't aggressive. I wasn't out of place. I was exactly where I'd always been. In control.